Welcome back to the rocking chairs here in Granddad's Lounge.
I like it. These are pretty good. This is
This is unbelievable. Richard Johnson, Split Zone Duo Podcast, Sports Illustrated. It's funny how we go with the podcast first now. That's how we do it now.
Hey, man, it's about branding.
It is.
It's about personal branding.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you guys do an amazing job at Split Zone Duo. Sports Illustrated, I might have written some stuff there back in the day.
A place you're familiar with.
Yeah, exactly. So we were having a discussion at Media Day, and I wanted to continue this on camera because I thought it was a lot of fun. We were talking about Jim Harbaugh and Nick Saban and kind of their different mentalities. Because we'd been standing there as Nick Saban's getting interviewed, and it was sort of the tail end of the hour of Nick Saban getting interviewed at Media Day. And he's actually being pretty fun because there weren't many people around. He's just sort of, he's telling stories about when he coached LSU and there were
He actually answered a hypothetical question.
Oh yes, the would you kick with Jaheim Otis if you had no kickers?
He answered a hypothetical question, which is something he hates more than anything in the world.
Jaheim Otis is a 330-pound nose tackle, by the way, who can apparently kick a 40-yard field goal.
Athlete.
What was a kicker in high school. So, yeah. So we had that. Nick Saban was talking about mentality. Jake Butt, actually, former Michigan tight end, works for the Big Ten Network, came up and asked Nick Saban a question about how do you get from being a great team to an elite team to a championship team. And Nick Saban's like, they all have the same players. All three of those types of teams have the same players. It's mindset. It's how do you handle every day? How do you go about your business? And that's what you mentioning Michigan the last 2 years in the playoff. And I do wonder, does Michigan have that kind of mindset that we know we've seen from Alabama over the years, that it doesn't matter which game it is, they're going to kind of come out and play the same way no matter what?
Yeah, I think with Michigan, the common theme of the last two playoff semifinals, and I was at both, was out there with the teams in Miami and in Phoenix for both of those bowl weeks. The common theme is hubris with Michigan. Michigan has had hubris about the team that they think they are, thought they were in those two games, coming into them. Against Georgia, it was the offensive line. It was the run the damn ball T-shirt. They just won the Joe Moore Award. They had heard all the stuff about Georgia, and they didn't think it mattered, and they thought their Big Ten toughness was going to win out. And then we saw what happened, and both of us will never forget that play where Trayvon Walker jacks up that Michigan left tackle, and you know what I mean. And you remember it's just a different deal.
Well, and that was the best collection of defensive line talent that we might ever see in college football.
Sure.
And I think that, so I don't ding Jim Harbaugh for losing that game.
But Andy,
they should have beaten TCU.
That's the thing.
Yeah, they're better than TCU.
If it was a hubris that expressed itself physically in the Georgia game, it's a hubris that expressed itself mentally against TCU.
Yeah.
Because they were not able to adjust to what TCU threw them. They were not able to figure out, particularly on offense, when they were trying to run the ball, how to effectively block TCU. And it's not a physical thing. Because we saw the next week against Georgia, they can be run over.
Yes.
But Michigan was not able to mentally get to a place where they were able to figure out the most effective way to be in the best place to block TCU, and they were not able to execute their full offense.
Well, and you wonder if that's changed, because I talked to a lot of people about the mindset of Alabama's players, talked to people who helped kind of create the architecture of it, and it's very much you're only thinking about this play. It's very cliche, the one play at a time, all that stuff, but they've somehow managed to get 18 to 22-year-olds to think that way, which is very difficult, and I think that's sort of one of Saban's superpowers. With Jim Harbaugh, he doesn't reveal much. He doesn't give us much in these, so we don't really know what they're telling these guys in terms of how to prepare mentally for these games. But I do feel like Michigan feels more results-oriented, like we got to win.
Yeah, because when you get here, right, first of all, it may surprise you, Andy, they are the number one team in the country, by the way.
They are. And they're the favorite in this game.
Yeah, and they are the favorite by a slim margin, but they are the favorite in this game. I think there is a lot more urgency involved about this game for them than Alabama. I don't want to say Alabama's happy to be here. Alabama's never happy to be in this spot or just happy to be in this spot, but they expect to be here because of their consistency and all this kind of stuff. For Michigan, this is now the third time they've done this, and it's time for you to pay this off. You've made beating Ohio State routine,
yes.
right? You've slayed that Leviathan. You've conquered that demon, both mentally and physically. So okay, that's kind of old hat. But now this is the next level you need to kick onto. And look, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the, I think, sense of urgency of the Michigan versus everybody nature of this entire season, proving naysayers and doubters wrong, and
Harbaugh.
The Harbaugh stuff. There is a, I don't want to say a last dance aspect to it, but we know that he told.
It definitely feels that way.
We know that he told players on this team, come back, let's do it one more time.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so coming into the season, there was a last dance kind of aspect to it, and a we're going to do this one more time kind of thing. But you think about the upcoming specter of NCAA sanctions, potentially going to the
Black
NFL.
Monday in the NFL coming up. Yeah, I mean, that's – and the thing with Harbaugh – the NCAA stuff adds more urgency to it, adds more, okay, this might happen. Things might have to be different next year, whether you want them to or not. But the NFL piece of it, and this is, I was laughing at Joey Molinaro, the comic who does the impressions of Saban and Harbaugh, had a great clip that he made this weekend where he does the impression of Saban talking to Harbaugh. And Harbaugh is talking trash to Saban because Saban wasn't successful in the NFL, but Harbaugh was. And that's the part I keep coming back to, like with the jobs that are going to be open in the NFL and the amount of them and the level of them and the quarterbacks who are going to be on those teams. Like if you're Jim Harbaugh, you're like, ooh, this is the time.
Yeah, and look, it's no secret around. I mean, it's no secret that he wants to go back to the NFL.
Yeah.
I think we all know that. We all understand that. I mean, there's going to be a line from San Diego to Los Angeles for that Chargers
to
job,
Chicago.
You know what I mean? You know, and you know, who knows? Maybe the Cowboys job comes open if McCarthy and the Cowboys flame out. You know, Bears. We'll see if Kevin Warren signs off on such a thing, but Bears. You know, Washington. You know, there are going to be very attractive jobs in this cycle. New England, and he for the idiosyncrasies, for the eccentricities, the guy wins.
Yes.
And the guy has won in the NFL, and it's so rare. Like when the Jaguars got Doug Peterson, it's so rare to be able to get a Super Bowl winning head coach or Super Bowl adjacent head coach, which Jim Harbaugh is. It's so rare to get those on the open market. And he, I wouldn't say on the open market, but he's at least on the market because he hasn't signed a contract that says he won't be contacted by the NFL, which Michigan would sure love him to sign.
Yeah. They pay him more than anybody else in the Big Ten, maybe more than anybody else in college football. Now, here's the thing about that mental aspect of it. I do think what has happened with this team this year, all of it, him being suspended early in the season, the sign-stealing accusations, the suspension of him as they're landing at Penn State.
Yes.
You and I were standing at the airport in State College. Like, all of that feels like it has, I don't know, battle test is the wrong word, but it has definitely molded this team. And I don't think there's much you can throw at them now in game that's going to surprise. They're not going to freak out. They're like, oh my God, what do we do now? Like, they seem like they are built to deal with things as they come, whereas maybe that team that played TCU last year wasn't.
Well, there's one thing we don't know about them, and what happens when they're down.
Yeah.
We do not know what happens when they're down, what happens when they may have to press, all that kind of stuff. But yes, there's not, and I think that coaches so often have to try to find, I mean, Saban even talks about it, have to try to find ways to manufacture, doubt, right?
Yes.
Like I remember, God, this was the national championship game when they played Clemson in Tampa. And I remember I actually was in Bama's team hotel and I snuck down to their meeting room area and they were these like obviously fake headlines, right? Like nobody believes in you and the dynasty's dead and all that kind of stuff. You always find a way to manufacture
I talked to
this.
somebody who was a GA on the Florida staff when they played Ohio State in the national championship game. And remember, everybody was saying Ohio State was going to beat Florida, so they didn't even have to fake it. But he said that Urban Meyer had them fake stuff to make it even worse, so that the players would just be so fired up.
Even worse, the Kirk Herbstreit going on College Game Day and saying they had no chance.
Exactly.
But so there's so many times when coaches have to manufacture doubt and all this kind of stuff. But that has not happened this season.
Yeah.
Like you literally gave them external adversity. And I know, we don't love that word because it paints a broad brush over a lot of things, but it's been there.
Right.
Like you've got.
It doesn't matter how I feel about it, you feel about it, anybody watching feels about it. It matters how the players feel about it, and they feel like those were adverse conditions.
The governing body of their conference and the sport took their coach away from them.
Correct.
For multiple games.
Yes.
I mean, that is what happened.
Yes.
And so if you want a Michigan versus everybody, I mean, that's it. Like they feel it's us versus everybody.
It's earned at this point.
Yes.
And so that I'm excited to see that. I thought both teams at Media Day were very loose. I thought everybody feels pretty good going into this game. Like and the Alabama players, you can tell, like, if you had given them truth serum after they lost to Texas, they did not think they were going to be here. They definitely feel like they've grown into it. You're going to hear from Caden Proctor in this episode, the freshman offensive tackle. And that guy, I mean, he's really open about what he went through. Yeah. Like, he was getting his ass kicked by grown men early in the season. And this is a guy who's 370 pounds. Like, he's never gotten his ass kicked in his life.
Yeah.
And he's trying to deal with that. But then you hear him talk about how he felt going into the Georgia game, and you're like, okay, you figured it out.
I think what Bama is going through this year is, in my opinion, the beauty of a bigger SEC and Big Ten with more like competition and a 12-team playoff.
Yes.
Alabama, and okay, Florida State fans, I hear you. But Alabama has been able to grow over the course of the season and still get into the dance.
We're going to see more teams like this when the 12-team playoff starts. There are probably going to be 3 teams in the field that are like this, that had something bad happen at the beginning of the season and then sort of put it all together as they can. And they're the ones you're not going to want to play.
And that's allowed. That should happen.
Yeah.
That's what happens in the NFL.
Yes.
Like, we don't just leave teams because they lose in September. And I think that, to me, is the beauty about the new 12-team system, and what I can't wait for, because I can't wait for, like Utah last year, for instance.
Yes.
Nobody wanted to play that Utah team
Oh,
last
God, at
year.
the end of the season? Yeah.
But we forgot about them in September because they clunked through September. And so, college football, I think, in general, has always been obsessed with kind of the undefeated champion. And I believe it was Kevin Steele yesterday, Alabama's defensive coordinator, who said Alabama's only been undefeated, what is it, twice?
Twice, yeah.
In Nick Saban's run.
Yeah.
They've only been undefeated twice.
2020. That's it. Yeah, and that, I think Saban's favorite teams are the ones that did grow.
100%.
2015 is his favorite national champion. I think if you go back, because I remember that season when they lost to Ole Miss. Remember that they weren't sure Jacob Coker was their guy. They started Cooper Bateman in the Ole Miss game. They bring in Coker. They still end up losing, but they realize, okay, we found our quarterback. And then they grew as they went. And that was very similar to this team, very player-led, and very player-led on the defensive side of the ball specifically. More in the secondary this year and on the D-line that year, but it's the vibes are very similar.
Yeah, I can't remember who was talking about it. I believe yesterday. It might have been Kool-Aid McKinstry. Apologies. But he was talking about having a players-led meeting after that Texas game.
Yeah.
And, players-led meetings, those often signal,
big trouble.
Those are often signs of trouble. But no, Alabama obviously has been able to congeal and come together and grow over the course of the season.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this game because I do think J.J. McCarthy talking about being healthy, if he's really, truly healthy and he can move around, I think that negates some of the issues that Michigan had in terms of pass protection toward the end of the season. Now, obviously, Zach Zinter is not good for them, but Trente Jones has looked fine at right tackle, and it feels like the moves they had to make actually will work. And I don't know that they're going to be able to just dominate Alabama up front, but I do think they can play well enough that McCarthy's going to be able to squeeze off some passes. Now, can the receivers get open? That's the tricky part for me.
I just don't think that's going to happen. I mean, they have – if Roman Wilson is the best you got against that secondary –
I think that – and that's the key matchup right there, because I do think Alabama has some guys that can get open, plus Jalen Milroe scares you so much with his legs that they don't all have to get open.
Alabama's defensive backs are the only unit on this team that truly scare you, right?
Yeah.
That's the only position group that truly scares you, and yet here they are.
I think their edge rushers are pretty scary this year too, even with no Will Anderson. But, for most of the Saban era, Alabama has not scared you off the edge.
Right.
And
Will
lately
Anderson,
they have.
Will Anderson was the first bone of. Obviously, they have had as good interior linemen throughout the eras, even when they started playing a little bit relatively less good defense. Interior has been where they're great, but Will Anderson was kind of a first of its kind, and then obviously Dallas Turner comes in behind him.
So before we turn to the Sugar Bowl, I want to ask you, Nick Saban, Jim Harbaugh, are we seeing the last of both this season, the last of one in college football, or the last of neither?
I'm about done predicting when Nick is going to hang it up. Because I actually don't think – one thing I don't think is I do not think you will see a Bobby Bowden-Long goodbye from Nick Saban. I think when he's done, he's done.
Yep.
And because of that, I think it's pretty hard to predict, obviously, now that they still are great and championship adjacent. With Harbaugh, though, there's just a feeling. There's just a feeling around this team. And, I know a lot of them probably won't say it, but there's a feeling around this program that, he's going to hightail it.
And there's two ways that he would have to. One is voluntary, one is involuntary. And the other piece of that is, I don't know if I would feel very confident in the idea of Sharon Moore taking over the program.
Yes.
So it wouldn't feel like it would be missing a beat if the NCAA forced you into something, or if Jim Harbaugh decided he wanted to go.
No, because Sharon, it's funny because people are like, oh, well, Harbaugh's superpowers, in-game adjustments, and all that sort of stuff. Which, yeah, okay, sure. But Sharon Moore was the guy in the Penn State game who said, to hell with the pass, 30 straight runs.
We got to do what we got to do. Yeah. And called a very aggressive Ohio State game.
Yes.
There were 3 plays, and I kept thinking back to the first Oregon-Washington game where Landon got crucified for calling, going for it on 4th down 3
Unjustifiably so.
Yeah, and look, Sharon Moore did the same thing, and they got him.
Right.
And
it's great when they work.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
But he did it in the correct, in the numbers bore it out, and then it also created this attitude where it's like, after they got a couple of them, you're like, okay, they're winning this game.
Yeah.
Ohio State ain't going to win this game. And so I do think the Sharon Moore piece of it, just knowing that he's there. My thing is, whether it's Jim Harbaugh or Sharon Moore as their head coach next year, I'm not worried about them.
Right.
They're going to be a very good program in the new Big Ten. They're going to compete for playoff berths. Based on what we saw in the Cotton Bowl, they're going to be favored over Ohio State again. I think Michigan's in a good place. Alabama, I go back to, we were talking to Kevin Steele, the defensive coordinator, and he's worked with Nick Saban at various points in his career. And so everybody's asking him, do you think Nick would hang it up if he won a national title this year? And Steele's trying to be diplomatic with the answer. And I just asked him, what the hell would he do all day?
Right.
And Kevin Steele goes, good question. Because it's not like he'd go play golf.
Yeah.
They got the car dealership.
He doesn't have.
He's not going to do that. This is what he lives for.
Yeah.
So, and I think as long as he feels like he's got the players to compete, he's going to keep doing it.
And I can't see him consulting, right?
Oh. He'd be really good on TV, but I think he'd be bored most of the time. There's just not enough work to be done if you're on TV. He'd be like, let's say ESPN hired him, he'd be calling up our friend Adam Rittenberg, be like, Adam, can I be on the podcast? Yeah. I can't just sit here. So, thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.